Hey there, how you doing? So I thought I'd do a quick little video. Again, we're doing the exact same thing we've done in the past. We're basically just doing a little live YouTube session to kind of talk a little bit about OMVIC and starting out with a sales career or moving into the automotive field. So I put up one video earlier and I've got some questions that came up. So we're going to go ahead and review those and just kind of probably talk a little bit more about it as far as time's concerned. So essentially, I've been in the car business forever. I've pretty much done every role there is in a car dealership. I've also worked as an independent. I've gone into actually audit dealerships. I've also gone in and done inventory counts. I've done everything from parts manager, service manager. I've been a manager on the floor. I've been a sales manager. I've been a finance manager. I've been a dealer principal in the past as well. So I'm pretty well rounded in that particular area. And I thought I'd share some knowledge and go through the process of retaking my OMVIC. So I've got myself a OMVIC student manual, which actually is mine from years ago. So we're going to go through this. And I thought, well, we'll start fresh. And why I go through the process to reobtain the license. We'll also learn the basics on how to do it. I figured I might as well do that online. Now I'm still in the automotive field. I've had my license lapse. So this is why I need to go back to the training. I'm in the manufacturing end of it. So I'm basically a little cog in the big wheel. So I'm not really on the sales floor. I'm nowhere near that. But I thought it'd be kind of a hoot to kind of go back through it and kind of relive some memories. So with that said, we had a couple questions. So let's go through them. So commission structure basics. So let's have a little look here. So again, this is unedited, unscripted. It's just me taking 30 minutes to kind of have a tete-a-tete, a basic conversation. And again, just taking feedback and questions as well. At the end of this, I plan to do a podcast version. So I'm going to take the bits and pieces from this and kind of amalgamate it into a 12-part podcast. So I think that's the end kind of plan for it. So let's see. So what's the difference between a front end and a back end on the deal? Okay, so this is actually an interesting question. So the front end is actually the profit from the car that you sold. So that's basically straightforward. It's your basic commission. Now, the back end is profit from things that would be sold on top of the car. So an extended warranty, a finance contract, aftermarket add-ons. Those are additional things that may carry with them either additional commission to be added to the car, or they may have a set rate. So a good example would be is if you worked in a Ford dealership, because there are separate departments, you would have a parts department. And if you sold a nice F-150 and you decide to put a Tongo cover on the back of it, or maybe one of those fancy ones that roll, high end, they usually be $3,000, somewhere around that range. Well, there's profit in that particular product. Now, the profit is edged out to the parts department, but the parts department, depending on the dealership, will offer you a small piece of that. And usually it's a set number. So it's going to be something between $25 and $150, depending on what you sold and the amount. So that's where you see most dealers, if they are kind of focused on helping a customer build the vehicle that they want. So in other words, if you rolled into a dealership and said, look, I want bush bars for the front, I want windows tinted, I want a Tongo cover or a box cover, I want slightly bigger wheels, and I want mud flaps and all that wonderful things. Well, if you're at a dealership that basically has just the front end on focus, and you'll see that in larger centers where they're just a volume shop, they don't want to get involved with adding in additional items. Whereas if you go to a smaller dealership or kind of outside that larger center, sometimes they become almost experts where you can kind of say, no, I want to roll all these accessories and these components into my finance contract. So instead of having to pay on your Visa or MasterCard, or you can blend it all into one. So again, back end, additional things that may be added to the vehicle, and you're going to make a percentage on that depending on the dealership. Not all dealerships do that. So again, it's one of those things that if you're out there looking for a job in the sales industry, and you're looking at automotive, where you pick to work is going to affect how much money you're going to make. So it's one of those things where we talked about in the last video. You want to be able to go through either some of the reviews online, and just get an idea what the dealership is all about, or actually have a frank discussion. And when you're going to do that, you're going to sit down with a sales manager, say, what's the process? Do I make money on the back end? Are there incentives in place for selling things like rust proofing or fabric guard, things along that line? And a lot of times they'll say, yeah, there's a small little incentive in that. And it's not one of those things where you're trying to pile up a large bill on a vehicle. What you're trying to do is cater to the customer's needs. So if that's what they want, then it's one of those things you should be able to pull a catalog out and say, okay, well, yes, I can definitely do that. If you want an upgraded package, then you can build it. So that's one of the things. Back end is key. So again, back end is stuff that is sold on top of the vehicle or in addition to. Let's see, what's the other one? Okay, who gets paid what? So this is another one where it becomes kind of a, a question for where you're working. So if you're in a small little shop, typically you're going to carry probably two hats. You're going to cover probably the finance office a little bit during non-business hours. That's kind of the norm. So if you're going to go out to a small little dealership, they're going to pretty much say, hey, you know what, you're working the floor. You might have to process some finance contracts. By that, enter the information in, do the basics, and then the finance manager will process the deal. That's pretty normal. In a larger franchise, you're going to be exclusively on the floor. You're never really going to go into the finance office at all. You're probably never going to be able to get a chance to really kind of try that. So if you're trying to balance out your career and say, look, at some point I want to move into being a finance manager, then you're probably better off looking for a smaller market dealership where you can kind of bounce back and forth. And a lot of those dealerships will even let you work the service desk a little bit, subject to vacations and holidays or if someone calls in sick. So that's where a small dealership, if you're starting out, you get a chance to try a lot of little things and kind of get a feel for it. Whereas a larger franchise store in a bigger center is going to basically say, hey, no, you're on the sales floor. Um, so let's just talk about that. So a salesperson is going to make that commission on the front end. Again, the sale of the car itself, right? So that's your commissions. The finance manager is going to earn pretty much everything on the back end because it's their job to sell an extended warranty or to sell a Tongo cover or to sell rust proofing. And again, this varies from dealership to dealership. So it's not written in stone, but to the most part, that's how that process works. So again, these are one of those things that when you're sitting down and having an interview, if you're out there for the first time, you're just trying to get in the door. That's great. Pretty much take anything you can get from that standpoint. Once you've been there for about a year, if they don't meet these types of requirements where you kind of go, well, no, I need to make a little bit of money on that Tongo cover, or I need to make a little bit of money on those tires upgraded, like snow tires, or I need to make a little bit of money on that, you need to find a dealership that will help support you from that standpoint. Most dealerships, if they were from the ground up, in other words, started from a guy that worked on the sales floor, moved his way up and became management, and then became part owner or became the dealer principal. Well, essentially, they're probably going to be the ones that'll try and move you to selling more, in which case they'll give you a little piece. If you're in an environment in a dealership where they're basically a franchise store and they're held by 7 or 8 different groups, and they're kind of amalgamated into one, you're probably going to be kind of just stifled into one position. So just be aware of that. Uh, it does depend on where you're working, kind of their approach as far as how to service the customer. It's one of those things you can go one way or the other, right? Commission details. So let's see. What are we asking here? Yeah, commission is a percentage of the dealership's front end profit. So it's what they call the gross. So the gross on a new car is pretty standard. You're going to be in that $1,500 to $3,000 range is pretty normal on a new car until you get to the end of the year where they start pulling finance contracts and they start bringing that down a little bit. Some dealerships will also give you a little bit of a bonus at the end of the year because they get a bit of a bonus based on volumes or quotas that they made on sales. So if they were, earmarked for that region to sell 150 pickup trucks with one particular trim, and then they hit that target, well, the dealership gets a bonus. So sometimes they will feed that down, and they'll say, okay, well, some of the sales guys get that, which is great, wonderful. And usually it's paid out in January or February. the following year. So in other words, it's not one of those things where you can kind of bank on and say, hey, that's a bonus. It's something that you're not going to be aware of. A lot of shops won't do it for the first year. Sometimes they'll do it on third year, where you're going to go, okay, well now you're a senior sales guy. You've kind of you've committed to being there, and that's their way of keeping you there as a stable employee by giving you that end of year incentive. So again, commission is on the front end. As a salesperson on the floor, you're going to be making that front end money, and it's going to vary dramatically, especially if you're on used cars. So used cars are different. So again, they're based on kind of market demands, how long the vehicle's been there, whether it was a trade-in or an auction purchase. So it becomes a little harder to kind of tell you what the commission structure is on that one. But it's easy math. So typically, there's going to be a kind of a step to it. So you'll get an idea as you move along. Um, Zero profit dealers, and there are a couple out there. So a zero profit dealer essentially markets as a non-commissioned sales floor. It's a way of kind of saying, okay, we have one set price. There's no negotiating. They're going for volume sales. They're still going to expect you to go through the exact same process you would do if you're at a commission shop. So in other words, you still have to go through the sales process, have the training. A lot of folks prefer having a flat or a zero profit dealership to work at if they're just starting out, because they're still learning the business. It gives them that assurance that, hey, at least I'm going to have a paycheck at the end of the month. So essentially, they're going to start off with a base, and the base is going to be pretty close to minimum wage, just so you're aware of it. I think that's just the nature of it. So the base is going to run you, an hourly, and you'll see it at the end on your pay period. There'll be an hourly statement based on 40 hours. They won't pay you overtime, and they don't pay you for coming on the weekends, right? So in other words, it's basically the money that's basically your starvation check, right? Then they'll say, okay, well, we do $100 flat commission on each car that's sold, and there'll be a tiered system. So in other words, it'll be based on, you sold $10,000 car, you make $100. Sold $20,000 car, you make $200. You get the idea. You make a $30,000 sale, you make $300. It plateaus a little bit at that point, but it kind of gives you an idea of where that kind of sets up. Where if you go, okay, you get your minimum wage, so you have that guarantee. And then you go ahead and say, okay, well, I'm going to do 15 cars, and each one's going to average out at, let's say, $15,000. Well, you're going to make an okay living. It's not terrible. But at some point, you're going to have that little voice in the back of your head go, hey, the guy across the street is getting paid 25% on the gross, and it's going to look a little greener. But there's going to be highs and lows to that. So just be aware of it. Zero profit dealers, you'll find them usually advertised up front. So it's one of those things where as you walk in, it's not a bad idea to go through their Auto Trader ads, check out their website, go to OMVIC and actually check the dealer rating. So if you're going to go work for a dealership that has a great rating through OMVIC, you're probably not going to have a headache. If you've got one that's got a couple little complaints and a few little issues attached to it, you might want to go in with your eyes open and kind of watch yourself a little bit from that standpoint. Monthly earning potential. So again, if we're selling 10 cars and you've got a $2,000 profit on average, again, some might be a little lower, some might be a little higher. That's kind of a comfortable number to sit within. You're going to be around that $500 a month. $5,000 a month wage. Now, keep in mind, you still have to pay taxes. There might be a couple fees attached to that and deductions. So in Canada, that can be pretty limiting. So that's one of those things where if you're in a bigger center, you're probably going to want to sell more than 10 cars, or at least look at a higher end or a more profitable dealership to go work at. Now, the dilemma is if you want to go work for a BMW store, you want to go work for a brand that's perceived to be a little higher end, like a Mercedes, the dilemma is you've got to get some experience. So it means you've got to go work at your low end dealerships for a little while, or come from an environment that the dealership will go, it's worth training. So if you came in from a higher end retail segment, you said, okay, you're in a clothing situation, or you're in jewelry, or you're selling accessories, or you're in sporting goods, and you're in a higher range level, well, you might be able to roll into a Mercedes dealership or a BMW dealership and say, look, I've got the core basics of selling down. If I can sell a high-end pair of shoes, then I can probably sell a high-end car. They just need to give you the training. And sometimes a dealership will actually step up and say, you know what, it's worth the gamble. And they'll put you through a training seminar and they'll put you through 3 months of a process to get you going. Now, that's just one of the things where in in the car business, you don't just move up in your particular dealership, but sometimes you move over in brands. So you have to be a little bit aware of that. Again, it's almost as if you're your own personal retailer. So you're looking at it from a standpoint of what real estate can I get? That would be the dealership. What services are provided to me that'll help me sell cars, right? And if you've got one dealership or one piece of real estate that can offer you more or can offer you more features, well, then you have to keep your eyes open on that. So that's one of those things. High-end profit deals may be between $3,000 to $4,000 profit. And sometimes there's more there. That's where if you've got a little touch where you can say, okay, well, I can get those little add-ons. Let's say you sell yourself a nice um, top end F-150 with all the bells and whistles to it. And the guy wants mud tires. He wants to upgrade the rims. And he wants to go crazy with it. And he wants to get it all financed. Well, if you're at a dealership that caters to that, well, that's spectacular. It means you should be getting a small portion of that profit included in the deal. That really does make that $3,000 to $4,000 profit or commission structure increase dramatically. So it's one of those things where you go, okay, well, now I can survive off 10 cars if my profit range is a little higher and if I can get those little add-ons added to it. Bonuses that seem to come up in dealerships, those are one of those things where it does depend on the dealer, and some of them can be pretty ridiculous. So it's one of those things where I've worked at shops where it's like spin and win. So you sold 10 cars, you get 10 spins of a wheel, and it could be a gift basket to a gift card. Or some places will say, no, you met a 6-month quota, and they'll say there's a bonus check for that. And a lot of dealerships, if they're working with an experienced sales team, and the dealer principal or the owner is familiar with sales motivation, or they've been in the business for a while, a lot of times they'll have those little points. We cut you a check, $50 for each deal that you did. That's an item. Or they'll do it at the end of the year. Again, that's part of their bonus program to keep the senior sales guys there or the performers there, so they're not migrating from dealership to dealership, because they're more than well aware of the fact that if you're sitting back doing 10 cars and you want to really get to 15, and you look across the street and you're going to go, well, that dealership's offering me a little bit more. They want to keep you there and stop you from moving around. So just be aware of that. What is a draw system? Okay, so some dealerships will give you a draw, which is essentially a loan. So what they'll say is at the beginning of the month, they'll give you a base of $1,200 or a base of $2,000, and you have to start earning at zero to cover that base. Now, their intent is saying, well, we're not giving you a $5,000 run, but they're giving you enough at the beginning of the month to be able to say, okay, you got your commission check, you got your draw, that should be enough to cover your rent or your mortgage. Now you have to go back and start earning again, right? So that's what the draw is meant to be. It's it can be a frustrating item if you're in a small moving dealership, because they'll carry that draw over. So it's one of those things where, yes, technically you get behind the 8 ball on it. It's not that common though, so it's not usually a big concern. So if you see there's a scheduled draw with your paycheck, it just means that they're waiting for the deals to close at the end of the month. They'll settle with you. So that's the idea behind it. So they're just waiting for that process to go through where they're getting paid from the bank for the car that they sold to be able to cover the payroll. So it's one of those things where a draw can be confusing, and they change at every dealership. Unfortunately, in Ontario, there really isn't a regulation or an industry standard with that. It varies. So that kind of gives you an idea on draw. Work hours and expectations. Well, so most dealerships are pretty laxed. In fact, if you're coming from an environment in regular retail sales, where it's like you're a key holder and you're there at like 6 in the morning because you got to get things unloaded to put things on the shelf, automotive is a little bit different. If you're in the parts department or you're on the desk, yes, you are in at 6:30 in the morning. And you're usually there until 6. So service end is a bit different. I might do a whole video. I might do a series on actually service end of it as well. But if you're on the sales end, typically you're rolling in at 9 o'clock. That's kind of the norm. A lot of the senior guys will miss that time a little bit. So in other words, there isn't a clock typically at the front desk. However, I'm going to tell you that if you're hungry and you want to do sales, you're better off coming in early. And the main reason being is, and it's going to sound ridiculous, but you'll get more done in that first hour from 8 to 9 o'clock before the sales room opens on getting your to-do list drafted. There's going to be a software package that they give you. And if you come in and you just rattle it off in 45 minutes, it's a nice way of starting the day. Say, hey, look, I've got all my stuff done. I've got my list for contacts that I got to call. You've got your training all listed for the day. It's always a good idea to start on the sales floor early. But they expect you to do 40 hours. So that's kind of what they're going to keep that draw at, is a 40-hour rate. Keep in mind, though, that if you're going to work just 40 hours, you're probably going to have a tough time at it. There's going to be more hours involved. Traditionally, a lot of folks out there will work an additional 5 to 10 hours at home. They'll have a little home office set up where they'll call clients because they're not in on the afternoon shift, or they're not in the morning shift, and they're doing the contacts kind of out of that little realm of schedule. So they're following up on that one. Plus, they might be doing something like, which I used to do on a fairly common basis. If I had a particular client that was either having schedule issues or out of the region, in other words, they had a hard time coming in, if I were finished at 4 o'clock, well, I would schedule a show and tell at 5. And I'd say, look, I'm going to grab the car you're interested in. I would drive it out to their work. They're finishing off at 5 o'clock. They got to run, pick up kids or whatever. It's going to be a 10-minute quick little view. And I'll give them some basics along with a little, used to include a little sheet with it and say, hey, look, this is your payments. This is based on your trade-in, rough numbers before seeing it. And then we'd set up a time on a Saturday if we felt that narrowed it down. I found that worked really well for me, at least where I was, because a lot of folks were shift workers, and I catered to a lot of blue collar clients from that standpoint, where they couldn't make it in during the regular retail hours. So being able to say, hey, you know what, we finish up at 9. I can drop a vehicle by 9:30. You want to look at it after dinner, do it in your driveway, have a quick little view. And it's one of those things where it's not a high pressure deal. It's not from that standpoint. Yes, you're asking for the business at the end. You need to. That's the nature of it. It's a way of just kind of pushing forward a little bit and kind of getting the out of the way mark. So hours and expectations are all over the place. Don't expect to just go in, clock out. You're going to be working. They're also going to expect you to do a few other things unrelated to the sales floor, and it's like prep work. So you might be bringing a car in the showroom or helping somebody do that. You might be helping shuttle cars around the lot. And again, a couple reasons for that. You want to be able to get in and out of a car effectively, so it starts and runs. Some of the cars will be sitting out there for 2-3 weeks because no one's been in them. That's just the nature of it. Some of them will run out of gas. So if you got somebody coming in and hey, I've got Bob's coming in to look at that pickup truck, you need to go out there, start the truck up, go for a little run, put a few bucks of gas in it, make sure it's nice and tidy. Somebody comes in and looks at it, there isn't any hiccups or headaches to it, right? So again, hours and expectations can be problematic. I also found that on the sales floor, what was really good, if you're out there, if you can partner up with your wife or your girlfriend or your significant other, or I used to help family members, that type of deal. Um, I had a really nice setup where my neighbor at the time was retired, and she used to be a receptionist, and she would actually take my rough drafts, clean everything up for quotes. Now we have ChatGTP to do it, but she'd also do some phone calls and do some scheduling. So it's not a bad idea that if you do have a significant other and they want to be able to piggyback a little bit, because if you're in a commission structure, it can be very stressful for the person in your household to be able to acknowledge that and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. So you can actually see it and you can actually go through it and say, hey, these are the folks that have come in, these are the calls out, these are the leads I'm working, these are some of the training seminars you need to go through. It's a good way of kind of sharing the load a little bit in the household. So if you've got that kind of arrangement, it works out really well. I used to partner up with a junior salesperson or a senior salesperson, where we just make a friendly deal where it'd be like, you know what? Yeah, if I'm out of here at 5 o'clock and I've got a client that has popped in unscheduled, it happens. If you can take care of them, that would be great. Pay the same. Um, Same thing forward. And you say, okay, well, somebody comes in on a time when you're not in, and you can kind of work it back and forth. That always worked well for me. But again, it depends on the dealership that you're at and how the commission structure is set up, and how much of a, how would I say this? How much of a team atmosphere is there? And if you're working at a dealership, you want to go with something that's got a team atmosphere. It helps you out a lot. Takes a lot of the headaches out. And when you're working retail, it's hard enough. When you're working customer service, it gets even harder. Then when you start moving into these numbers, which can be very intimidating, not just for the salesperson, for the person buying the car, it can become a very stressful job, which is why you see that most people roll out of it. It's one of those things. So, personal commission and kind of my journey in the past. So, when I started out at a Hyundai dealership. Um, that was my first franchise store. Prior to that, I worked at a. Oh, hold on a second. Hey, Google. Thank you. Thank you. At the Hyundai dealership, it was all basically flat rates, and you got a little bit of the add-ons. My first job was at an Acura dealership, and I think I'm almost certain because I was very young that the sales manager there and the owner took pity on me, um, and they basically let me work the sales floor. That, or they were just looking for some fun activity or angst to kind of drive them insane. So my first sales job was at the age of 16. So, and I worked at an Acura store, and I'm going to tell you, it was a fun time, and I learned a lot. And I started there initially um, as a porter, car washer, and kind of the guy that ran around after school and worked the weekends and just did odd jobs. And then the dealership changed hands, and the new guy that came in uh, basically cleared the dealership. Um, so they let everybody go without informing me because I wasn't there on regular schedule, like 9 to 5. I would come in after school and come in on the weekends. And strangely enough, they gave me a key back in the day. So during that week where they had kind of closed down a little bit, no one really passed any information on to me. I just kept tidying up and cleaning up as needed and left little sticky notes all over the place. And sure enough, when it came in, it was like a handshake and a thanks for washing the floors. Where do you see yourself in the future? Was kind of the conversation. I told, well, I'd really like to be in the finance office, and I'd like to be on the sales floor. And they kind of said, okay, you can work the sales floor. We can't let you in the finance office yet. And that was back in the 90s where you didn't even need an OMVIC license back then. So it was one of those things that was fun. And I actually did sell cars there, which is why I ended up moving into Hyundai. Um, it's just one of those things where it kind of that's where that was at. And during my during my time when I was in high school, and that was at the senior years, I think I made this is the 90s, so I was pulling probably mid 20s, which for the time was not bad for something that would be kind of a part-time gig. When I moved to a Hyundai store, it was with the onus or the promise that I could move into the finance office and share some of that back end a little bit. And that one was about that 45 to 50 mark. And then I moved on to a GM store, and I moved on to a Ford dealership, moved on to what was the other one that I did as well? Oh, I did a, this was fun. I did a Neva, which is like the Lada dealership. I did one of those as well, where I actually shared a little bit of the partnership. So again, your scale today is going to be different, but it's one of those things where, yes, it is a numbers game when you look at commission, but yes, you can go beyond the normal kind of regular salary if you plan to go that route. It all depends on what you put into it. Let's see, hybrid sales and finance roles. Okay, so again, this is kind of the dealership that you have to go and figure out who will allow you to do that, who will let you have the front and the back end. Very rare in a big center to be able to do that. Smaller outskirts you might want to look at, and sometimes it sounds crazy, but you can make more money in a smaller town than competing in a bigger um, bigger area, especially if you can shoulder some of that responsibility and develop more skill sets. So again, it's one of those things where you have to shop a little bit once you get your license and a little bit of experience. Okay, so tips that I would probably suggest. How do we do a hustle daily? Show up on time, stay focused. Um, it's going to be one of those things where there's a front reception area. One of the biggest habits that a salesperson kind of develops is to stay in the office when you're not on the floor. Usually there's a floor rotation, so you're not tripping over people. A lot of them will migrate to the front desk and they will use that as a mini bar. Stay away from there. What you want to do is you want to stay either in your office, work your work work your programs, uh, stay focused on the product, get product knowledge, walk the lot, know what things are. If you've got a rotation where they allow two people on the floor at once, stay on the floor at all times when you're on that schedule. Don't migrate off or go to the desk. Um, Stay focused on what the task at hand is. I'm not saying that you have to be regimental about it, but it's one of those things where that seems to be where the new guys kind of drift and then you fall away. It's one of those things you won't last. So be aware of that. Uh, Avoid wasting time when you're there at the dealership. So the phone with social media and distractions that you might be watching YouTube on it, the phone can be a real deterrent. It can be a great tool, but it's one of those things where you should have a personal phone and you should have one for work. They're not expensive. The reason being is that now you have a personal one. You know your mom's called. You want to surf the web, do your thing on your time. If you have a dedicated work phone, you know when that one rings, that's a client, right? You know that's the office. That's what you want. Some phones now, I've got one that's got a dual SIM. Pick up one of those. They're not expensive. You're stuck with Android though, so you can't really go into anything else. But Android's perfect for that, especially if you utilize Google, which is one of my favorites when you're in the sales end of it. Let's see. Oh, time. Yeah, time with bookings. So a lot of folks will rely on the reception to book your appointments and to do follow-ups. Don't do that because they've got no real push to do that for you. It's one of those things where they're busy enough answering the incoming phone calls and doing reception work. You know, keeping positive, getting clients coffee, moving things around, doing what a receptionist does, which is usually doing work for the manager, not you on the sales floor. You're the little guy, right? So do your own bookings, do your own follow-ups. Then you can control your schedule. So you can schedule people when you're actually there. I used to like to say I'm doing my time in the dealership, that 8 hours. And I would like to schedule, if I had the Saturday off, I would schedule my appointments for the Saturday if I had control. And the reason being is I'm not on the floor. I'm not there working the desk. I'm there with 4 appointments to look at cars and to close them, and potentially to deliveries. So that's the way I used to do it as far as that's concerned. Or you pick a Monday, right? That type of deal, right? So again, try and control your own appointments. Stay positive, and that can be really tough. So it's one of those things where you got people shopping you all the time, correcting you on what you're doing. It can be a real hard environment, even on the back end when you're sitting in doing sales meetings. It's a tough thing to stay focused. It's also tough to stay positive. And it's one of those things. It's a grind, like any other retail environment. I'm not saying that it's worse than selling furnaces or worse than selling shoes. It's just one of those things where it can be a real environment you'd have to really enjoy. So just kind of give you an idea there. Can I give some sample commissions? So again, it's going to vary depending on lot pack, what the vehicle was traded in at. Was it a auction piece? Was it a dealer demo? They all range. So it's one of those things to be able to say, hey, this is what you're going to make on average, is really tough. And it's going to be based on the dealerships. Typically, it can be anywhere between $150 and $2,000 on a sale. But again, you can't bank on that $2,000 sale every single time. So it's one of those things you just grind it out. So those are some of the questions that were just forwarded to me. And again, I'm by no means an expert. I've been working in the car business for, ever. It's one of those things where, and I've been in just about every role. And I just thought, again, it would be fun to go through the licensing process again, which is what I'm going to do. I thought it'd be a good idea to do a little podcast and kind of follow up with it. I'm doing these live chats to answer questions and basically to kind of say, okay, well, this is what the auto industry is all about, and go from there. So I hope you enjoyed the journey. If you are interested in more information on how to get your OMVIC license and the process from there, subscribe. That would be wonderful. Watch the videos, give a thumb up would be great. If you have questions, like if you're new and you're going, Keith, how does this work? Or I'm on page whatever, or I'm on the line trying to fill it out, and you have some dumb question that you kind of feel embarrassed about asking your manager because you're going, I'm new and I don't want to rock the boat too much. Well, put it in the chat. There's probably 10 other guys in Canada asking the same question, just don't want to do it, right? The other one is if you're new to Canada, a lot of folks don't really pay attention to sales. They want to get into a factory gig or they want to get into something that's going to be kind of a stable thing. But if you were coming in from India, or if you're coming in from China, or you're coming in from Canada as an open source, or at least for the last couple of years it has been, if you're in sales in the background and you can bring that skill set to a dealership, the language barrier, if you think it's there, nothing will build it quicker than having to do it, right? And you can cater to a certain client. So if you're the type of guy out there that goes, oh, you know what? I know Hindi. English is a little dodgy, but I can speak Hindi. Well, that's great. Um, Maybe you're Ukrainian. Maybe you got 4 or 5 different languages because it's like Ukrainian is kind of smack dab in the middle there, and you pick up a little bit on just about everything. So if you're been there for a while, you might come in and say, hey, you know what? I can do a little Russian, I can do a little Ukrainian, I can know Serbian, I can kind of go through that. Those are real clients in the Canadian market, and they're sizable. And it's one of those things where, yeah, you might have a struggling point with a guy like me, but to be honest with you, I don't really put the bar there. I can work with just about anybody if I'm trying to make a purchase. And most part, it's numbers and features, and you're going to be printing things off anyways. And getting through that process usually isn't a stumbling block from that standpoint. Again, that's where you normally partner with somebody and say, hey, you know what, I've got a senior guy or I've got another person I've settled up with. If I'm having a language barrier problem, this person is at unease, I can say, you know, I can hand it off to Keith, and then Keith will take my client, right? And Keith will go, oh my God, I've got a client here that I'm having a struggling with. Um, I can hand that off because this person is new to Canada and they're Ukrainian. Hey, that happens. They want to buy a car. And usually they're far more comfortable dealing with somebody who can converse back and forth comfortably with them from that standpoint, because it's an intimidating, stressful, difficult time to go in and buy a car, and they've got other hurdles to deal with. So they probably got new credit, they've got probably job related issues they've got to go through finance. And that's also another one where if you do have a multitude of languages under your belt, you can actually go to your manager and say, you know what, um, I probably should get a little bit of the back end, because they're going to need their hand held going through the finance department. And if the finance manager is smart and it's on the mark, they might say, you know what, I agree with you. And I will process the paperwork, do the documentation, and they'll split the deal, or they'll give you a small portion of it to offset the time that you have to take to walk them through the process. And by walking them through the process, they're going to be more at ease when they come back and say, hey, I understand the finance contract is 72 months. We had to go a little longer to get to the payment. Or they'll understand that, hey, we went to 48 because it met your budget, pay less interest, get in, get out quick. What I find with most of my European clients back in the day, they only really took advantage of financing if the interest was right. European buyers is very different than a Canadian buyer. They don't rotate out of their car traditionally. They're going to run that car. By run it to the end of life is kind of the norm. They don't go 3 years and switch out. Normally what happens is they'll buy a car, and usually they'll buy a staple car. Like it's usually something that's pretty easy to service and maintain. They're pretty knowledgeable buyers from that standpoint. They've got an inkling for a brand that they've been very comfortable with, and they will continue to go with that route. And it goes like this. They buy a new car. The wife basically gets to drive it. The husband's driving the beater. That's the norm, right? When that wife's car gets to be 3 years or close to 100,000 kilometers, and it's a nice car, well, then that gets rotated to the husband, and then they go buy another car for the wife. It's pretty normal. Like that's kind of the standard thing. And then that car that the husband's driving, if there is a son or a daughter, normally that gets tossed to the kids at that tail end of life, or it gets tossed to a brother or a brother-in-law or something in the family gets moved around a little bit, right? And by doing that, there's a couple good reasons. They save a load of money on taxes, not rotating out as much. Usually they're servicing their vehicles either at a small independent shop that caters to them, or it's usually within their community, or they're doing some of the service work themselves because it just needs to be more of the norm in that particular area of the world. So again, if you're you in Canada and you're having a difficult time and you think, okay, I'd like to have a chance, um, the automotive sales end of it is pretty a good entry level into the car industry. So keep that in mind. Okay. And if you're a dealer principal out there and maybe you've got some information out there, you can kind of say, hey, Keith, I like what you're doing. It's pretty cool. Here's a couple of recommendations for some books. Or maybe you've got some wonderful stories about the new sales guy that came in and what happened or why they're not there anymore. Or here's a good one that I like. Why they're still here after 7 years. That's a great story to hear from. Okay. So again, I try to keep these at 30 minutes. We're coming up to 45. So I do apologize. There's a host of questions. I tend to go off a little bit, but I hope you enjoy it. And again, watch for the podcasts. The podcasts are going to be basically a finished or a condensed version of this. Okay. So have yourself a pleasant and enjoyable day. And again, made it to the end. Great. See ya.